in this base. So you have to really be aware of cannon rushes on this map. But in general, if you don't have at least 2 Zergs on your team, you need to down this map because it's really awful for Protoss and Terran. Even Terrans are going to have a hard time defending because the ramps are so large that you're always going to be forced getting a late gas, especially if the other team has 2 or more Zergs and you know that from the beginning of the game. Mutas are also really good on this map just because there's a lot of dead space along the outside. All the bases are pretty large, and to chase the mutas out here, unless you have blink stalkers or, I mean, hell, Terran can't even really defend that effectively on this map just because there's so much space inside your base between your ramp and your main base to defend with turrets and everything else that mutas are a real issue on this map. And there's almost always some place for mutas to escape. The only person who's really kind of protected against mutas is the one who's in the back center of the map, but even that is not always a safe place to be because sometimes that person will neglect getting any kind of air defense at all, and all of a sudden mutas will take out their entire force of workers. Terrans, you're going to have a lot of fun playing Hellions on this map because drops are really strong. There's a lot of places to drop and not be seen until all of a sudden your Hellions are in the enemy mineral line somewhere and taking out a bunch of probes or SCVs or whatnot. Doing drops with bio is also very good because there's plenty of places you can escape to, and also if you go, say, bio with a bunch of medevacs, it's very easy to control these islands off to the side of the map. These really favor Terran, but you're only going to have that be the case if there's not a bunch of Zergs on the other team. So in general, again, if there's more Zergs on the other team, you're going to have problems on this map. Even taking the island expansions will be an issue because oftentimes at least one Zerg is going to be tier 2, which means they can basically drop creep over here, and until you get drop ships you're not going to be able to take out the overlords. And mutas, unless if you have a bunch of turrets, mutalists are easily going to take out island expansions and kill off drop ships. Tanks can be pretty good on this map because most of the areas leading into the expansions, this side's a little bit wider than the other, but it's still pretty easy to defend. Because basically if you set up tanks in the center here, you can defend all of your expansions, all 4 of the first expansions that your team can take. Tanks also are very useful when you're trying to siege mineral lines such as the ones along this edge and also this edge. I'd say you can basically set up siege tanks here and you can hit their main base, actually, if you have them set all the way right in here. So tanks, pretty good on this map as well. Although in general kind of mobile armies are just a little bit better just because unless if you're able to do this kind of low ground harass, tanks aren't always the best. Protoss, you're going to have kind of the same thing going on as the Terrans. I'd say if you go Colossus, you're going to be able to really easily defend or harass these mineral lines here. And also, most of the areas on the map aren't all that wide, so Colossus are pretty good. Blink Stalkers aren't awful on this map, but they're most of the time not the best, just because once you do blink into the enemy base, oftentimes you can get zoned in and get stuck on their side of the map somewhere. As far as the expansions go, most of them are pretty easy to defend because, as I point out earlier, there's really only 2 ways in, and both of these can easily be defended by tanks. Also, these areas are pretty easily choked off when it comes to fights, and since most of the expansions are pretty nearby, it doesn't take a lot of time for part of your team to get from one side of the map to the other. So you're going to have a lot of times where it's basically drop harasses that are going to control the pace of the game, and also basically big armies fighting as one. Okay, well that's it for this map, and time to move on to the next. Now we're on to Outpost, another Terran and Protoss favored map. These ramps are pretty narrow on this map. The rush distance it's pretty short on the sides, but across map it's pretty long. The only problem that you're going to have issues with is trying to defend your allies' base in this case, because it's pretty much the same distance from this side here to get to your allies' ramp as it is from your ramp to the closest enemy ramp. So counterattacks are going to be basically the way this map is almost always played. It almost always comes down to 2 players defending this side and 2 players defending this side, and then kind of a little bit of a tug of war trying to take control of the Xel'Naga towers, taking out expansions, And as you get later in the game, you're going to find, teams struggling over these side expansions oftentimes. There's only really 3 safe expansions, which are the ones that are in the center of all the bases. These expansions are pretty easy to defend just because there are 2 kind of narrow spots in which you can basically plant all of your units and defend easily. If you have anybody take one of the outside expansions, it should almost always be a Terran player with a planetary fortress, because if you have a Protoss take this expand, he's going to have to invest a lot of money in cannons, probably at least 3, maybe 4 cannons to be able to safely defend this. And you can see it's a pretty far distance from this ramp all the way down here. And if you do go down to defend this, oftentimes you're going to find yourself surrounded by enemy forces. So, in general, let Terrans take the side expansions on this map and let Protoss and Zerg players take the center expansions. Early pull strategies aren't that great on this map because in most cases it only takes 1 player to block off completely or get a bunker up or something like that. 4 buildings can easily block this ramp off, and once you do that, it's very good to do a timing push if another team goes an early pull strategy. As far as Protoss players go, Colossus are going to be better on this map just because, as I pointed out earlier, there's 2 narrow points in which you have to defend. And Colossus are very good in narrow spaces like this. And also you're going to find that when you do go to the enemy's base, you can essentially sit here and just cut off all reinforcements if their army is trying to defend their expansions. So Colossus and tanks are very strong on this map. Tanks especially so, because once you control the Xel'Naga Tower on this side, you can defend forces that are much greater in number, just because the Xel'Naga Tower is going to give you vision of them coming in and give tanks their maximal range without having to win the air war. Drop play isn't too bad on this map because there's a pretty wide space along the edge here, and also it gives you a little bit of control of the outside bases. But in general, I'd say siege tank pushes and a kind of tug of war is how you want to play it as Terran. Zergs are most of the time going to want to expand early, unless of course the other team has less Zergs, but somehow you have 3 Zergs to 2, in which case they're not going to be able to block one of these ramps. Then you might be better off doing some kind of early pull strategy or a Baneling bust or something like that. But otherwise, probably macro up a Zerg, or even just generally keep this map down if you're a Zerg player. Oh, this is the last map in the map pool for 4v4. This is Sand Canyon, and is pretty much like Lava Flow, just twisted on its side. The only difference is there's no island expansions in this case, but these gold rocked off expansions here kind of serve as an island in a way. This map is most favorable to Zerg because all the bases are separated, the rush distance isn't that long, and also the fact that